I'll just say something briefly at the beginning. Okay. So welcome everybody to the second lecture of Radical Anthropology Spring Term. And Chris left us on a cliffhanger last week, and he's going to tell us the rest of the story, how singing turns into language. And so I'm just going to hand straight over to Chris. He's going to talk about 45, 50 minutes. We will mute, actually, Chris, it's better to mute everybody now so there's no interruption. And you talk, and then we'll have questions.
Okay. For those of you who weren't here last week, Jerome Lewis and I are writing a book, and it's called When Eve Laughed, The Origin of Language. And the short version is that laughter was the ability to have a collective laugh at idiocies, foolishness, I mean, at life really, and get over the difficulties of life, all the sufferings and joys and hopes and fears and stuff. To have a good laugh over everything, set the scene for language. In other words, it created this social atmosphere within which the human potential for language was most likely to flower. And when I asked, partly seriously, but not entirely seriously, what might have been the first word, I said, well, if there's only one word, it wasn't exactly a word, because words are by definition defined in opposition to other words. So if there was just one word, it must have kind of meant everything and also nothing. And in addition, it wouldn't really have been spoken exactly, much more likely to have been collective singing, no doubt dancing as well. And it meant no, in a sort of sense, it meant that rather like when Jerome Lewis asked the Mengele people that he works with, ask the women, why do you sing all night? They say, well, we're singing for our lives. So women will sing with this polyphonic form of singing to be safe from predators, from dangers in the dark particularly, but also not just from external animal predators, but also a chorus of women feel safe from any kind of harassment, including harassment from members of their own species, like a male who might be causing trouble. So in that sense, no to harassment, no to danger, no to threat, getting over that threat, having a laugh. In that sense, this was the world's first word. Now, today, I want to concentrate mostly on two things, really. One is the tongue. Languages are called tongues for a very good reason. We use the tongue as well as the lips and other what are called articulators in speaking. And the other topic, and they will sort of be a bit connected, hopefully, is how you get from singing to grammar. And perhaps I should just stress that laughter is nothing like language. Laughter, ha, 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 it's got no grammar, it's no words, it's just a uniquely human or distinctively human vocalization. Singing also is really nothing like language. I mean, with singing is a huge amount of repetition. Singing is essentially collective and emotional, whereas what formal linguists would call language consists of words in combination. So words and rules, words and grammar. And it's not immediately obvious how on earth you'd get from singing, which is costly singing. Singing is, of course, ritual, really. It's vocal ritual with all that, time spent on it. It's not particularly efficient. In any song thing, the repetition is the fundamental logic of it. How you get to grammar and spoken language, which is, I mean, just the absolute opposite. Every time anybody opens their mouth and speaks a sentence, it's probably the first time that particular sentence was ever spoken in the history of the universe. So if you keep saying the same thing while you're speaking to somebody and you keep repeating the same phrase, there's something definitely wrong. It's not exactly language. Whereas, of course, with song, repetition is the whole point of it, really. So let's start with the tongue. I think I mentioned last week this rather peculiar thing about all of us, including me just now when I'm speaking. I'm kind of eating, using my teeth, my tongue, my jaws, I'm in a way eating, using all the apparatus that's evolved for me to be able to chew, lick, taste, munch food while phonating, while my voice box is vibrating. So why is that unusual? It's because when a chimpanzee produces a vocal sound, like a pant-hoot or a food call or any other its species-specific vocalizations, as it opens its mouth and starts to make a sound, it shuts down the tongue. The tongue is not active, and it does, and all the other things which we call articulators, which are the different parts of the vocal cavity which we use in speech, all those get shut down, and so shall I just say, perhaps as a kind of obvious example, a chimpanzee pant-hoot. I'm not going to give a chimpanzee pant-hoot, but I was kind of taught by Andrew Fowler, my friend, many years ago. And I'm not using any of my articulators in that. My mouth is staying open. My tongue isn't moving. I'm not chewing while I'm doing it. And of course you can't really make that sound. Even I can't make that sound without a lot of kind of emotional cost. When a chimpanzee does a pant-hoot like that, it really gets louder and louder and louder and louder and louder, and it takes it out of you. It's most emphatically a costly signal. And so now, what is it about the tongue which is the problem? I mean, what is it which enabled humans to start using the tongue in their vocalizations when non-human primates apparently just shut the tongue down? That's the tongue being really the most central articulator, in other words, part of the articulatory apparatus of all. Well, often in the literature on language evolution, you'll find the idea that chimpanzees or non-human primates have a relatively inflexible tongue. There was once a whole theory about the hypoglossal canal. That's the hole in the base of the skull through which part of the spine comes through, and the nerves which control the fine musculature of the tongue and make this very flexible, complex movements of the tongue possible. And one of the arguments was that if you look at Homo sapiens and sort of measure the size of this canal, it's a lot bigger than it is in chimpanzees. And the argument was that you can sort of tell from fossils when speech began to emerge, because the hypoglossal canal began to get wider, and therefore the more nerves are reaching the tongue, and which meant that the tongue was more flexible. And I just find that whole idea absolutely extraordinarily sort of, I don't know, dopey. I mean, just absolutely ridiculous. It's just such a weird idea. But nevertheless, you find various senior primatologists. I mean, I have a huge admiration for Klaus Zuberbühler, for example, a wonderful primatologist who's done a lot of work on vocal signaling among Campbell monkeys and other kinds of monkeys, and a major figure in the primate study of vocalization within the framework of the evolution of language. And he too discusses the sort of deficiencies in non-human primates, the deficiencies which prevent them from speaking. And one of them is a relatively inflexible tongue. So let me just say, in a chimpanzee, there's just probably not a single part of its whole body more flexible, manipulable, easy to control, complex in its movements than the tongue. And not just with a chimpanzee, not just the tongue, the whole face is extraordinarily expressive. A chimpanzee face, the way it can screw its face up, the way it can, use its mouth as well as its tongue and jaws to express feelings, and I mean things like lip smacking and so on. I mean, the idea that somehow the tongues in non-human primates is inflexible and that stops them speaking is just absolutely, I can't describe how absurd the whole theory is. And of course, as soon as you think about it, you realize what the issue really is, why non-human primates shut down the tongue when they vocalize. And now I need to get into the main topic. And I'm always so surprised, and having been very closely involved in EVA-Lang for many years, helped set it up. EVA-Lang, this is the International Conference Series on the Evolution of Language, set up in 1996 by myself and Jim Herford. I just never cease to be amazed at the way in which the EVA-Lang community, all the different scholars who write about the origins of language, they ignore the most important body of theory that we have, and that's signal evolution theory. So the founder really of modern signal evolution theory is Amos Zahavi, an Israeli ornithologist. And I did mention him last week, but I want to go into a little bit more of it now. The crucial issue is the reliability of signals. The reliability of signals. So perhaps just to illustrate this with a kind of little sort of make-believe thought experiment. Imagine that you and a friend have robbed a bank, and you're meeting out afterwards. One of you's stashed them. Maybe your mate has stashed the money away somewhere, and you're not quite sure you trust him, and he's beginning to tell you that he put it up in this attic, up this stairway, and he's giving you all these instructions, and you're not quite sure you believe him. Can you see what's going to happen if there's no trust? In order for this other person to convince you, he's got to be able to look you in the eye, and you're going to be looking him in the eye, or her in the eye, probably him, of course, if it's a bank robbery, and you're going to be looking out for those symptoms, those bodily twitches, those eye twitches, the sweat on the brow, the sort of color of the cheek. I mean, all sorts of giveaways. You're going to be looking for giveaways to see to check out whether you think this person's telling you the truth. All humans have got a sort of pretty good lie detection competence. And if you're not sure you believe somebody, in other words, you're not sure you believe their words, you're going to force them to fall back on the kinds of signals which are involuntary, which can't be controlled, which are just involuntary body language, because that body language can't lie. You're looking for something which can't be a lie. And there's going to be signals which emanate from the state of the body, its emotional state, and various other things about that particular individual's body. Well, to cut a long story short, what Zahavi says is that all primate vocalizations are of that kind. They're the kind of sounds which can't be fake. And the reason why only those sounds are used is because listeners want to be sure that they're not being tricked. And that's very important with great apes in particular, because like all primates, but maybe especially great apes, their intelligence is Machiavellian. Chimpanzees are full of trickery. Their intelligence is Machiavellian in the sense that there's no kind of particular idea of a sort of general moral framework of life. You do what you can get away with doing. It's pretty competitive in a chimpanzee social system. And because everybody's, when they hear a signal, they want to be sure that it's true, it's reliable. And so they force each other back on hard to fake signaling. And because that signaling is body language, and bodies are costly to produce, costly to maintain, costly to keep, just to keep on saying, like a pantoot or some other sound, So a chimpanzee doesn't just make a sound and then that's it. It will make that sound again and again and again and again. And the listener is interested in the acoustic properties, and it will evaluate those acoustic properties on an analog scale. They're going to be graded. You're not going to just say, oh, that's a food call, or oh, that's a pantoot, and that's it, and then sort of register that fact. The signaler is going to have to repeat. Maybe if there's some really powerful resistance, it's going to have to amplify, can make it sound quite loud. And so all animal signals, according to Zahavi, are costly. In other words, you have to put muscular effort, time, energy into the signal. If you're meeting more resistance, you might have to amplify still more and repeat again and again, and maybe use a multimedia display to sort of get your message across and overcome the resistance. Sometimes, of course, the signals aren't very costly. They might be quite cheap. Contact calls between little chicks, little gelada baboons, constantly keeping in touch with each other with their vocalizations. They're not particularly costly, but there's still a considerable cost in the signaling. And the cost is crucial, because what happens is that the listeners who aren't sure they believe a signal will drive the signaler to the limit of what it can afford, the muscular and energetic and time limitations it can afford. So you force the signaler to signal to the limit of what it can afford, and so the signals are going to be costly to the extent that there's conflict. Obviously, to the extent there's not very much conflict, the signals can be relatively cheap, but the signaling will never be zero cost. Now, the crucial thing about language is that its format is not analog. It's not graded, if you like. The format for spoken language is digital. It's as if it consisted of ones and zeros, like the language of a computer. And the point about a digit is that it doesn't cost a thing. You just switched on the signal or switch it off. And as long as the difference is detectable, that's enough. For those of you who are interested in what digital signaling kind of looks like, there's a very nice thing on the internet. It's called what is it? Dynamic sagittal section. It's from Toronto University. And you just click on it and you'll see a kind of cross section of the human skull with the lips and the teeth and the tongue and the voice box. And you can press little buttons, and you can press the lips so that they close. You can press the nasalization so that it's off or on, the voicing is off or on. And as you press these little buttons, switching one of the articulators off or on, you can produce say a B sound in English, the consonant B. You have exactly the same consonant B and switch voicing to the off position so that the voice box isn't vibrating anymore. And magically your B turns into a P. And you've got the difference between pin and bin, which could be a huge difference. A pin is a tiny little thing, a bin is a huge big thing, heavy thing. You can't put things inside a pin, you can put them inside a bin. And so you have a whole sentence, maybe much more than a sentence, probably the whole, maybe a whole sermon or something. The whole meaning of it is radically altered by switching off or on one of these articulators, which phonologists call distinctive features after Roman Jakobson. Now, why am I going into all that? Because switching one of those articulators, one of those distinctive features, to the off position or to the on position can make a life or death difference. I think I mentioned it last week. The difference between we will meet you tomorrow, we will eat you tomorrow. The second sentence, I've just removed an M. That cost me nothing. A life or death difference to the listener, just at no cost to me whatsoever. And when I say no cost, I mean really it is zero cost. It doesn't cost any more to say we will eat you than it does to say we will meet you. Removing a consonant or adding one or removing a distinctive feature or switching it around costs nothing. Now that's very puzzling because in terms of Zahavi's costly signaling theory, it should be impossible. It should be impossible to have, you can make pretty low cost signaling, but even a little chick cheeping to another one, it's got to have that body. I mean, the listener can hear the actual body of the chick peeping. It's not just a sort of disembodied sound. And all animals that they signal, they invest their body in that signaling, and that's in the particular signal. With a digital signal, you haven't invested your body in it at all. So logically, if costly signaling if costly signals, which in all the animal world there's nothing but costly signaling, if it's costly because of the lack of trust, then supposing you got a zero cost signal, it must mean sort of mathematically that trust has just soared up to the point of infinity. In other words, digital signaling logically must mean infinite trust. Now, how on earth can you have infinite trust? I mean, even me with all kinds of my friends, I don't know if I'd exactly say that trust is exactly infinite. That's a big ask, isn't it? With language, given that words can be, nuanced, they can be twisted this way or that way according to your agenda and stuff. I mean, infinite trust is a bit of a nonsense, really, although you can be very trusting towards people. And of course, the truth is that what it is that when we hear people speaking to us and when we're talking with them, we're interested in any case. We're not measuring the consonants and the vowels according to how reliable they might be, and we're actually interested in the narrative. So even if it's a fictional narrative, even if it's a fairy tale, a long recount of somebody's memory or something, the trust is infinite because we just know that that person's intentions, communicative intentions, are being expressed in that way, and because the whole thing is kind of, whenever we speak from the standpoint in costly signaling theory, from the standpoint of a chimpanzee, if you like, the whole thing's fictional. So when we speak, we're navigating with each other as we talk within a virtual world. We're not actually engaged in, if you like, brute reality. So I'm giving a talk now, and none of the things I'm talking about are going on either in my room here or where you are. We're talking about chimpanzees. There are actually no chimpanzees around. So the whole thing is virtual reality. And when you're making a move in the virtual world, as opposed to in the real world, you can do it without any energetic cost whatsoever. And you don't have to invest your body in the signals at all. People are just interested in what it is you have to say, if you like. Now, okay, getting back to that earlier issue, what is it which makes non-human primates shut down the tongue when they vocalize? Is it because their tongue isn't flexible enough? And of course, as so often with these issues, you have to turn the argument not just slightly round, it's best to turn it right the way round. The thinking that we come across with people who talk about inflexible tongues is not just slightly wrong, it's about as wrong as it possibly could be. The reason why chimpanzees do not use the tongue is because it's too flexible, it's too manipulable. And therefore, if you can manipulate a signal, why would you believe in it? In a world where trust is in short supply, in a particular political framework like a chimpanzee social system, where there's enormous amounts of dominance and submission and conflict and tension going on all the time, why would you, in listening to a signal, rely on those aspects of the signal which can be so easily manipulated as you could if you use the tongue or the other articulators? Now, the point about the tongue and the other articulators is that they didn't evolve for signaling at all. They evolved for eating. And when you're chewing a piece of food, you don't really care. I mean, the resistance to your eating is just a utilitarian thing. You just eat and stuff. As soon as you're into signal evolution, as Harvey points out, all those dimensions of utilitarian function go out of the window, and signaling, instead of being under selection pressure to be efficient in signaling, unless there's a lot of trust, and in the animal world there's never really anything remotely like the kind of trust we assume in language, the signaling is going to be, to put it another way, there's a reason why in the whole world of non-human primates, all those 222 or so species, anything remotely like language is just ruled out on principle, because digital signaling itself is just zero cost signaling, and you're not going to get zero cost signaling in a Darwinian social world. So perhaps I can now move, well, perhaps not quite. I was going to move on to the singing side of things, but perhaps just to emphasize a couple of things that I said earlier on. I said that when we speak, we're making moves in a virtual world. The classic analogy there is a game of chess. You move your rook, you move your castle, you move your queen, you move your pawn, and you do not need to make a muscular effort. Theoretically, you could just use, if you had a sensitive machine, a computer with a sort of laser beam looking at where your eye was directed, it could easily work that way. And I think they've developed technology where you can just look at something and they can pick up what you're looking at. No energy is needed at all. And the reason is, of course, because they're not real castles, they're not real horses, they're not real kings and queens moving in the real world. They're just moving from one square, which is a digit, of course, to another square, which is another digit. And the classical body of theory on all this is called speech act theory, coming from Wittgenstein, but developed by John Austin, which is that when we speak, unless it's irrelevant, we're doing things with words, we're making moves. But the moves we make when we speak, although we can add emotion, we can add prosody, we can add song, we can repeat, we can stamp, we can sing, all those things. Speech itself doesn't necessarily involve those kinds of things. We're making moves in a virtual world. And in a virtual world, there's something digital about the moves we make, because if you had a chessboard with sort of fuzzy boundaries between the different squares, or certain pieces which are sort of a little bit like a knight and a little bit like a rook, you just couldn't play the game, because the things aren't real. You have to agree on what they are. You have to agree on their identity. You can't smell them, touch them, taste them, and sort of feel for what they are. There has to be what they are as institutional facts is purely a result of agreement. You can't agree on a slippery slope. You can only agree on certain points, and that's why making moves in a virtual world requires this off-on digital, if you like, sharp, distinctive structure. Same with currency, by the way. You couldn't have a currency which was analog. Currencies, the coins, banknotes, all these things, they have to be, it has to be digital because it's purely institutional. But now, when John Austin says we're making a move in a virtual world, the issue is, well, where did that virtual world itself come from? And it certainly doesn't come from language. And John Austin makes it very clear there has to be a kind of ritually structured setting within which alone this strange thing of making moves, in like linguistic moves, can occur. There has to be the agreed surroundings, the status of the different individuals concerned has to be institutional, has to be thereby agreement. And again, just to make a kind of analogy, and this is one that John Austin himself makes. So maybe a member of the royal family saying, "I name this ship the Queen Elizabeth." Okay, well, she splashes a bottle against the side of the ship, and lo and behold, something's happened. Namely, the ship has become named. It's now got that name, the Queen Elizabeth. And what John Austin, he describes somebody who's a bit drunk walking along, and he decides, no, he doesn't like that name at all, and he smashes his own whiskey bottle against it and says, I name this ship, I think Joe Stalin, I think is the example he gives in the book. And of course, the ship hasn't been named Joe Stalin because he's not the Queen, he didn't say at the right time, the place, and all this. So all these ritual, ceremonial circumstances which are required to perform a speech act, those need to be in place. And I have heard people say, yeah, but that's just formal language. What about just an ordinary, everyday sort of thing? So I don't know, looking out the window and saying it's raining. Surely that's just descriptive. But not really, if you think about it. I mean, you wouldn't just say it's raining if it didn't matter, if it was irrelevant. If your utterance is at all relevant, it has that same effect of making a move. So my example would be, you're all, a bunch of you are waiting to go on a picnic. You all prepare the sandwiches, you've got the tablecloth, you've got the mats, you're going to go outside with a basket, and then you look out the window and you say, oh, it's raining. Well, you don't go for a picnic in the rain. So by saying it's raining, you've now done something. You made a move, namely you've cancelled the picnic. And so the work on speech act theory has just come to the conclusion that when anybody speaks to any effect, they've made a move in virtual reality. But then that in turn, of course, is very important for humans, because how the world is construed is also important. We live in a world of institutional facts, and not just in a world of brute facts. And money, marriage, citizenship, promises, all these things they exist simply because of agreement. And the agreement is more than linguistic. To get the agreement, you need a deeper level of activity going on. And the simple word for that is ritual. Philosopher Bourdieu, for example, calls it habitus, because we need to include sort of everyday ritual, not just the solemn rituals. But without some kind of ritual which is collective, and we don't even have available to us the virtual world within which to make linguistic moves. So right, the second topic I wanted to talk on this evening is song, and how you get from song to words and grammar. And as I said earlier, it's not at all obvious. My favorite writings on this topic are by somebody called Bruce Richman, Richman. He's a primatologist working with gelada baboons. I think he was doing this work on baboons before Robin Dunbar started doing rather similar work. And what Richman points out, and these are things which were written in the late 80s and 90s, is that gelada baboons, they love to keep in touch. They live in large social groups. They digest grass, so they can, they don't need to disperse widely. They can, a huge number, several hundred, can be forming a community, surviving fine on the vegetation that they've got. And they love keeping in touch with their vocalizations. And Richman points out that they make all kinds of interesting sounds. kind of consonants, fricatives and stop consonants and all sorts of things. And he just points out that these sounds make, you might almost think they're talking to each other. But Richmond points out that what they don't have is whole sequences of sound which are accurately repeated. They don't remember a sound which is they've just heard and then mimic it and repeat it and sort of answer each other back with maybe a slight variant of the sequence they've heard. And then he points out that this feature of human speech, which is that we have kind of variations on a theme. We say we have what are called by linguists constructions, and we repeat them, but we don't repeat them identically. We make a change at a certain point. And what Richmond points out, that this idea of rhythm, repetition, and when somebody's started to say something, you can almost predict how it's going to end. Those features are actually features of music. Music is repetitive. Music is kind of catchy. And when we hear the beginning of a tune, after a while, and it's been repeated a few times, we can guess what variations on that tune might be, and we can sort of anticipate. And of course, as soon as we have music, it's infectious. Music is a very bonding activity. It's collective. And what Richmond points out is that some of the features which differentiate human speech in terms of its sound structure from what gelada baboons do are features of music. But it's just that the gelada baboons, they don't really do anything like choral chanting, they don't synchronize their sounds, and they don't repeat what they've just heard, either in full, accurately, or with some kind of variation. So what Richmond suggests is, okay, how do we get from song to grammar? And so it's a little bit like the way I started this whole talk last week, with the idea of women in the course of human evolution linked to each other. I'm assuming we've got back to local residents, women are living with mum, living with sisters, they've got a lot of solidarity, and one of the things they do is they dance together and they sing together. So Richmond has this scenario, rather lovely one, of early humans, just before language gets sort of modern, gets grammatical. This is the song we sing when we're going looking for honey. This is the song when we get up in the morning and are preparing ourselves for an adventure. This is the song when we're coming up back in the evening with firewood. This is the song we sing when we remember somebody who's recently died. So we have this song and that song and the other song, these different songs, and they're all appropriate to the occasion. We sing these songs, they're emotional, they're bound, and the emotions are kind of genuine. You wouldn't dream of singing the honey song unless you were actually going to get honey. You wouldn't dream of singing the song to mourn somebody who's died recently if somebody hadn't died recently. And it's really important that there's an authenticity in this singing, that the emotions are true and appropriate to the occasion. So that's his starting point. And it's almost as if we've got different kind of words, but they're rather like the way I introduced the world's first word. It isn't exactly a word, it's more like a song and a dance, perhaps, because in the singing, you'll always get a few, gestures as well. You can't just sing static, you're going to sway your hips, you're going to move around a bit as you're singing. And so you have, in a way, the honey word, but it's the honey song. You have the word for death, but it's the song you sing when you remember that somebody's died or you're still mourning for their death. So you have these, if you like, words, but they're choruses, and each one is appropriate to the time and place and to the occasion because they're emotional. And it'll be kind of shocking to have a fate just to sing the wrong song at the wrong time. But then what Richmond says is that you have within the song, and remember we've got this idea of repetition. You repeat the song and repeat with all music. Of course, music is hugely repetitive, but you sing it with slight variations. And what Richmond suggests is that you have, at a certain point in the song, you have what he calls an open slot. And now I'm interested in this, and yet I have my worries about the theory. I'll just explain it. It's you're singing the honey song, and it's for real. You really are all going out to collect some honey. You're getting excited. This is the song we all sing. And now one of you is just remembering somebody who's just died, and it comes to mind the mourning song for this dead person. And there's a certain point within the song, like an empty slot, where you can put a little snatch of this other song just to convey to somebody else that you're thinking of them while you're going to collect the honey. And so you have this open slot. And what Richmond suggests is that you've already now got the combinatorial aspect of language. You've got a kind of a ritualized element of song. It's sung lots of times, but at a certain point, you can slot in a fragment of some other song, which is then, of course, the principle of recursion. You're embedding one element, a shorthand element of one song, into the long and often repeated element of the original song. And so he says, once you've got open slots within these song-like chanted formulae, there's no stopping, in principle, the rest of it. And what he then says is that the constancy, the part of the song which is repeated again and again is, if you like, the grammar, and then the words are the little elements which are shorthands inserted in certain points in the song. It's all very interesting, but of course there's a huge problem there, because it's like saying, as so often with these theories, like, we've got a rule, which is that you sing the song at the right point in time with your correct emotions, and then you break the rule. And it's not clear to me what it is that allows you to break the rule. So I'm just thinking, a group of girls, they have a song which they sing together when they're laughing about the boys, and they're going to go and, they're going to go and tease the boys or have fun with the boys. And they've got this special kind of song they sing. Well, if they're at the funeral, they're mourning for somebody who's died, and they're dealing with the body, and it's all very, very sad. And then there's an open slot in that song, and suddenly the girls burst out with their having fun with the boys song. I mean, that would be very inappropriate. The emotions would not seem to be fitting for the occasion. What is it which licenses humans in this scenario to start faking, when previously the whole point was the authenticity of the singing and the authenticity of the emotions involved? What is it which enables this fake? Now, I completely agree that the whole point of language is that it consists of fakes. I mean, there's no question about it. From a chimpanzee point of view, every time a human being speaks, nothing's true. It's not body language. It's not reliable. It's a fake, and it could be an honest fake in the sense you're not trying to fool anybody, but it's certainly not true. But all I'm saying is that it's difficult to simply sort of say, right, this fakery, this inappropriateness just gets inserted, and there, Bob's your uncle. You explained language. I do think that the theory is quite a good one, and I also think that the idea of mojo, which we talked about last week, which is this thing which kind of captures all the different dimensions that we need to get language off the ground. It's humor, it's gestural humor, it's mimetic humor, it's plenty of vocalizations, not necessarily words. So a bunch of men might be out hunting, and they reenact incidents, and they laugh about their foolishness when they let the animal go, or it made a fool of them, or they stuck their foot in a big deep bog or something, and it was just hilarious. And then, of course, I think more interesting in many ways, because more political, is women's mojo. And again, I won't go into detail now, but some usually a man is making a fool of himself. Some of the older ladies start to mimic his behavior, getting a laugh going. Soon everyone's laughing. And the one person who's not laughing is the target of the joke. And the women keep laughing and laughing until at long last, this person sees the funny side of things. He joins the human race by seeing himself as others see him, which is called egocentric perspective reversal. And I do think that laughter, one of the things which Warner puts in her thesis, but of course you don't have to read it that way. You can simply read the philosopher Henri Bergson. Bergson points out there's something about humor which is heartless. That's the way he puts it. In all humor, there's a kind of cutting edge, a kind of slightly cruel edge. So, I mean, the classic slapstick humor of the man who's walking along the pavement and slips on a banana skin. I mean, it's funny. And the reason it's funny is because you don't really, you don't care. It's not your mum that fell over and hurt herself. It's some sort of idiot. And you're laughing because you're safe. But Bergson points out that in all humor, you're kind of getting over life's pitfalls. You're getting over life's emotional ups and downs, all the things, all the joys, all the pains, all the sufferings, all the grief, all the things which really matter to you. If as a group you can have a really good laugh about things, somehow you're over everything. And of course, as I think I mentioned last week, laughter itself is that getting over things. Laughter probably the kind of the way in which, if you're looking at how laughter would have evolved, the precursor would have been some kind of vocal mobbing, aggressive, full of tension. But then if with chimpanzees, for example, they're doing their wild barking, they're threatening, aggressive mobbing of some threat, some alpha male perhaps. Finally, when the threat dissolves, they might carry on that mobbing, but now with a reverse significance, because the danger's gone, everyone can relax. And laughter seems to be mobbing in reverse, mobbing once the problem's gone, once the tension's dissolved, and is simply carrying on the sound to celebrate the victory and to express your relief. But you've always got that kind of reversal. There's something, some paradox, some pain, some problem which is conquered. And as a result of the dissolution of the conflict or contradiction, this uniquely human vocalization we call laughter sort of bursts out. Well, that would create the conditions under which something like Richmond's scenario will begin to work. If it's too serious, if it's a funeral, you wouldn't be, you wouldn't exactly be doing gossip. You wouldn't be doing language. You can do that afterwards. But somehow, once you've got over the problems, once you've it doesn't have to be problems. Once you've got over the sort of joys and sufferings of real collective life, and you can have a good laugh over everything and relax, then you've got at least the emotional conditions to begin to take life not so seriously, and to start just moving around in one another's imagination. You're making moves in a virtual world, because thanks to the previous performance, thanks to the previous build-up of kind of ritual, Mwadjo is a form of ritual, of course, you've now got the necessary shared assumptions and shared values to be able to make those moves. We've got sufficient in common for fictions, metaphors, of course, are fictions, to be able to work. So I think that's the argument which Jerome and I are going to be trying to refine, that laughter is absolutely crucial. But laughter is one of those many reversals, I'll just end here now, many reversals which needed to occur and did occur on the road to becoming symbolically cultural humans. So there doesn't seem to be much doubt that if you have a social structure, social system based on dominance and subordination, based on threat and violence, you're not going to get language. And David Graeber makes that point very nicely in many of his writings, that if you can persuade people using a stick, using threat, you're not going to be listening to what they have to say. And if people feel that the way they're going to be persuaded to do things is by some sort of threat or induce, or just material inducement, there's just those are not the political conditions under which language is likely to flower. Language requires many, many different things. One of them is turn taking. You have to make a sound. You have to wait for the other person. You then, when they've finished making their utterance, at a certain point, you then intervene. So this idea of to and fro, turn taking is absolutely crucial. It's also absolutely crucial that you hear yourself speaking as if you're that other person. You have to know what they think, what ideas they've already got in their head before you make your intervention to either correct their idea. But you have to have this thing called intersubjectivity. You have to see yourself as others see you. You have to hear yourself as others see you. And as you're speaking, you have to sort of hear yourself as if you're somebody else. None of those things would be possible in a social system based on dominance and submission. If somebody who is your boss, you're not going to be wanting to confide in them. You're not going to really listen to them, except if they're making some kind of threat or inducement. All the kind of creativity of language presupposes reciprocity, turn-taking, equality. So you need an egalitarian social framework. And the crucial thing is that this laughter, which accompanies Mwadjo, we think now, linked with also so many other things, living with mum, Sarah Hurdy's collective childcare, and those crucial evolutionary factors, those are the factors which actually generate the necessary egalitarian and therefore relaxed, easygoing, tolerant atmosphere which would make the potential for language, which I think probably our species had from a very early stage. I mean, one of the interesting things is that I've just been reading an article by somebody called Tecumseh Fitch, who just says that monkeys have got all the languages. Sorry, he says that monkeys have language-ready vocal tracts. He actually says lions have language-ready vocal tracts. So the teeth, the jaws, the lips, the tongue, all those things, we would have had those, all the necessary apparatus to produce speech long before we actually developed speech. What was necessary was the revolution, the counter dominance, the resistance to dominance, the reverse dominance, the overthrow of primate dominance, the establishment of a moral order, the feeling of relaxation once all the internal conflicts have gone and been transcended. The human revolution liberated a potential for language which had long been present. And language isn't the main thing. Language is a kind of, it's almost a sort of icing on the cake. Language is certainly not what made us human. What made us human was practical solidarity and revolution. Language was one of the great rewards of all that. And language is something which, once we've had that revolution and got that trust, then we can use language to share our dreams. That's it. Everyone's muted.
Brilliant.
Thanks, Chris. I'll mute people. Thanks, Chris. Anybody got any questions, comments?
Yes, hi, I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, I can see you.
Yeah. Thank you, that was fascinating and quite complicated for a beginner like me. I have an observation and a question. First of all, I'm thinking about this idea of having a structured song that then has slots opening up for something new. And I'm thinking about your standard pop song, which has a verse, a chorus, and sometimes a middle eight. And in the middle eight, that's the bit where there's a bit of something new kind of coming in. So I'm just sort of struck by that similarity.
Well, that's right. That's true of all music. And one of the wonderful things, I didn't say that, which I really should have added, it's certainly going to go in the book, is that the modern approach to grammar is basically the prevailing theory of how grammar works. Is called construction grammar, and my favorite person who writes about this is called Adele Goldberg. She has this idea that you have these things called constructions, and a child never learns words when it's little. It learns a construction. So it's like, would you like some milk? Would you like some orange? Would you like some drink? Would you like to go for a walk? You know, so you can work variations on a theme, but some aspects you don't vary. So you say, would you like a drink? But you wouldn't say like drink, would you? Or like drink, you would. I mean, there's a constancy of structure in the repetition. Then there's the variations are only allowed at a certain point. And what Adele Goldberg points out is like, what do we mean by grammar? And it's so simple. Grammar is just the part of these constantly repeated constructions, which doesn't change. So and every child, it doesn't want too much variability. It wants reassurance. Everybody knows in a primary school, everyone says, "Good morning, Mrs. Robinson." Good morning. You have a lovely little chant, and so you have these what are called constructions. I wouldn't go there if I were you. I wouldn't do that if I were you. I wouldn't say that if I were you. So the child learns a whole construction, and only then does it begin to learn how you can bring the changes at a certain point, in very much the way that Richmond described. So we have a nice joining up of modern theory of how grammar works and how children acquire grammar, linking up with this idea about singing. Yeah.
So I'll jump the second bit. Well, I know I won't. I'll make my second observation, which was that I'm just thinking about this idea of, sorry, can you hear me?
Only very quietly.
I'm thinking about this idea of your example of going hunting.
Yeah.
And then having your hunting song, and then someone inserting a bit of a something else song, like the grieving song. And I'm wondering how that links to living in the present moment and the capacity to remember and think of things that have happened in the past. So that the morning song that you insert could be a poor old Bob, he died, he was eaten by a tiger, we better not go this way on our hunt after all, we'll go this way instead, and then we won't get eaten by tigers like Bob. Could the ability to think about present, about past and future as a newer ability of humans, be a reason that you could then insert those bits? And there's an evolutionary advantage to doing it.
Well, no, because all animals have brains, and the whole point of a brain is precisely what you said. So any animal, a rabbit, a dog, I don't know, lion, a gorilla, there's no question they can remember things and they can anticipate things. That's why we have a brain. The issue is, how do we share our memories and share those anticipations and things? And that's difficult for reasons of signal reliability and trust. So I wouldn't say, I'm trying to get away from the idea that somehow the brains of other animals are somehow defective. They can't think ahead, they can't remember, they can't anticipate. I mean, the brain's an extraordinary organ, and it's true that humans, we have a very unusually large and complex brains, but I just don't believe that chimpanzees don't speak or can't speak because they've got sort of cognitive deficiencies any more than they've got deficiencies in their tongues. I really want to very strongly emphasize the dimension which has been left out in nearly all reconstructions of language origins, which is the dimension that Ahmed Zahavi comes up with, which is signal reliability. How on earth can you trust a signal which isn't attached to anything in the real world, isn't attached to the body, isn't anchored in reality? Why would animals in a Darwinian world, and a Darwinian world simply means one where you might have a lot of cooperation, but you've also got huge amounts of competition and conflict as well. How in a Darwinian world are you going to get communication through patent fakes? And so Zahavi explains why you don't even get the beginnings of language outside human society. You don't even get the tiny little glimmerings of grammar with chimpanzees, despite their brains and despite their ability to remember things and anticipate things. So the mystery is, how is it there's no grammar in other animals, even the very intelligent ones? None at all. Plenty of communication, but no language. If by language you mean this strange system of digits combined according to grammatical rules.
So Hugh, you gonna go? Hugh, you
Yes. Sorry, I'm just unmuting. That's all absolutely fascinating, as it was last week. I think I'm just wanting to encourage you to flesh out the links between language and music, just because I love music and music's my thing. I have a friend who says we shouldn't ask, is music a language? We should ask, is language a music? And I'm just throwing into the pot really a couple of things. One is long ago, I watched some lectures by Leonard Bernstein in which he tries to talk about the link between Chomsky and grammar and music. It's all very long time ago. I don't know if you've got any observations on that. And the other one is really, you've talked about repetition in music. And obviously there are elements of repetition in music, but I think there are also elements of repetition in language. And just thinking about how people learn to improvise in, for example, something like jazz, which is very much an idiom, very much the kind of thing you have to kind of learn and get to grips with. And there are ways of approaching, anyway, that's it, really. That's it.
Well, I'm by no means an ethnomusicologist, and in fact, my colleague Jerome Lewis, who's co-authoring this book, probably would be better at answering that question about music than I am. But I just wanted to perhaps just read out from Richmond here. People know, store, remember, have access to, and produce formulas as holistic, independent, and highly idiosyncratic entities. Online access to such a collection of open slot formulas best explains how people are able to carry out the idiomatic fluency of conversational talking they do most of the time at lightning speed. Such formulas are exemplified by expressions such as, I wouldn't do that if I were you, with its open slot variants. I wouldn't say that if I were you. I wouldn't go there if I were you. And then he asked this question. I'm coming to a little bit closer to what you're asking. How might such a collection of repeatable formulas, such a repertory of holistic formulas be built up? How, in fact, could it begin? How could it grow and accumulate? How could whole groups of speaker participants work on and craft together sequences of sounds so that they became stuck together definite entities with meanings that everyone could agree upon, recognize, and use automatically? I suggest that the key is regular expectancy based on repetition and a regular beat, that is, on what are essentially musical dimensions. Now, when we're talking about hunting and gathering, I mean, although jazz is, extraordinarily impressive, and I suppose Jerome would suggest that we at least start with the kind of music which hunter-gatherers in Africa use, which is this wonderful polyphonic singing, and just simply because that's so much about everybody listening to everyone else, being very, very creative, very spontaneous about where you come in with your voice, how to act.
Jazz.
Well, it is. No, you're quite right. No, I'm not denying that at all. It's very like jazz. It's absolutely. It's all about listening. You don't just do your own thing. You really have to know your mate, who they are, what they're thinking, what they're going to come up with next. So, but that repetition, when it's in language, that aspect of repetition, and of course you're absolutely right. Language. It might be true that every sentence we utter is kind of novel. I hope it is. I mean, if somebody that keeps saying the same sentence twice, it's going to get very boring. And by the way, it's true that when primatologists study, say, chimpanzee vocalizations and relate them to humans, they just say this chimpanzee is saying the same damn thing again and again and again and again and again. It's incredibly boring by human standards. What's happening here is that Richmond is basically saying that, yes, there's elements of repetition in speech. Every child needs that repetition, and it's what gives it confidence. And what makes language learnable is the enormous degree of repetition in it. That element of, I mean, a little kid is a pattern recognizer. We don't have a language instinct exactly. In some ways we do, but that comes a little bit out of fashion now. But we have a child has a pattern recognition instinct. It needs to find the pattern, and it gets hold of that pattern and it runs with it, and then it just knows there's only one aspect of that pattern which is allowed to vary, and that part which is constant is the grammar. The part which you vary is the words. Which is lovely, and it makes everything nice and simple, it seems to me.
Annie, did you want a question? Otherwise, it's the Allah iPhone.
Yes.
Annie?
No, that was a mistake.
Sorry.
It was a mistake.
Yes.
Allah iPhone, then? Do you want to go?
May I ask a question?
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Camilla. Hi, Chris. Thank you very much. I love listening to both of you, because the thought experiments take me to just wonderful places which I often go on my own and end up getting lost in. But when I listen to you, I find myself really inspired. One of the things that I was wondering is also about music and the origins of those sounds, especially of the primates you spoke about earlier, regarding when they are lip smacking, the vegetarian primates in large numbers, when they're around each other in large numbers, congregating. Do they, when they make these sounds, is it not a kind of a murmuring of starlings in the sky in a visual aspect? I'm taking the analogy of the visual aspect of starlings in the sky making the patterns that they're not necessarily aware of making, but could the similar patterns be like proto songs happening during many actions of lip smacking and lots of sounds being made and epiglottal sounds being made by the primates that we're speaking about in the hills, eating grasses and so on? Sorry, the question was so long.
I'm not quite sure what the question is. I mean, the thing about the gelada baboons is that they live in very large social groups. It's very important that they keep in touch with each other. They don't want to get isolated from the group. So they're sort of contact calls in a way, but obviously very sophisticated ones. And it's true that according to Richmond and Robin Dunbar, of course, the whole idea, by the way, of vocal grooming, very famous theory for the origin of language that Robin Dunbar developed, is that these geladas, they could be doing what other primates do, namely physically grooming. They could be just picking through the fur for fleas and signaling their commitment to each other that way. But with these geladas, they do that, but they do this thing called vocal grooming. I'm not quite sure what I mean, Yes, I mean, there's an emergent effect. I mean, I think I know what you mean, but obviously when starlings are all just flying around, no individual knows quite what shape they're making.
Right.
They're just.
I understand. My analogy wasn't that clear.
No, but it's a nice one because
I was looking for serendipities in the sense that not necessarily. I know that signals have a meaning. So, for example, if primates make a particular sound to say we're being attacked from the ground up, then the animals will go to up in the trees. And if it's vice versa and it's a bird of prey, they'll go in a different direction. And those have very strong meanings, and they're repeated, and they happen to work for them, and they know that they work for them. Somehow that trust is built in.
Well, no.
Is it?
Well,
is it?
It depends whether you want to. I mean, in a way, there's no trust whatsoever.
Right.
Because it's a bit like humans when we only trust the sweat on your brow, the twitches in your eye, the sort of giveaways. I mean, did you call that trust? I mean, if
no, I don't know. That's what I'm trying to ask you. Is that a form of reaffirmation? A form of reaffirmation of truth?
I'm trying to answer your question. I'm trying to answer your question. These are the famous vervet monkeys who have these alarm calls. And really, I think the consensus these days is that those calls are made by the monkeys as escape response for different predators. And, and the escape response involves a certain constriction of the vocal cords of the throat and so on, and it results in a certain kind of sound. But they can't make that sound unless they really are afraid of whatever it is, the snake, the eagle, the leopard, or whatever it is. And so, so you have audible leopard fear, you have audible snake fear, you have audible eagle fear, and the sounds are convincing simply because no animal would be willing or able to produce a complete fake. No vervet monkey can make an eagle call just to deceive somebody else, because when there's no eagle there, it's a bit like, I mean, it's an exaggeration to say it's like a cat purring. When a cat purrs, that's audible happiness. It's not pretending to be happy. It's the sound of that purring is audible happiness. Zahavi's theory is much more subtle and sophisticated than that, because of course animals can do all kinds of things. They can quite considerably stretch their calls in the direction of some intention, of course. But there's a reason why those sounds work, and that's because they can't be faked. And the point about language is that it consists entirely of fakes. The very definition of a symbol really is that it's something which is absolutely not anchored in anything and depends purely on agreement. Rather as a chess piece, you just agree that you've lost your knight, you've substituted a button for it, you all agree it's just as good as a knight. It's a complete fake, but we humans are quite prepared to rely on those things because we are extraordinarily collectivist kind of, when we're in our communities, we are interested in each other's thoughts. We're not just interested in reality, we're interested in shared fiction. And so I'm not quite sure how to answer your question, except to say speech is in a radically different dimension. We have just gone off this cliff with our capacity to sequence sounds, to express complex thoughts. It's absolutely, it's no longer anchored in the way that Zahavi describes all other animal signaling to be anchored in the real world.
It's fascinating. Thank you very much.
I think Denise said she wants to say something.
I was going to say something. Now I get lost a little bit, Chris, with your insistent binary models. And I just wonder if you can explain a little bit more, because the problem with the binary model is that it can be just self-replicating and there's no stimulus for change. And so where is your change in the system? Because as Jenny and Hugh have said about music and, looking at the oral tradition in different parts of the world and the people that write about oral tradition, they do have stable episodes and repeating episodes that young people learn, but then they have to have these moments of improvisation so that then there's a stimulus for change and the thing can go on transforming and going out into the real world. And I just wonder if you've looked at something like Edward Cohn's work in his book, How Forests Think, which is a very fascinating book that takes Charles Peirce's work on semiosis. And again, you know, you've got a sign and meaning one in an existing situation. And then there's a second moment, an event that happens. And then there's a sign two, meaning two. There's a process of interpretation and change and transformation. And then you go on to the next one. So I find there's always this moment of transformation as opposed to just a binary enclosed system. You know, it's all the argument between Durkheim and Gabriel Tard about limiting yourself to a binary system.
I don't quite know why Mwajo is binary. I don't quite know why my thinking there is binary. I mean, I certainly think that getting into human symbolic culture is a kind of quantum leap. I mean, it may have taken a while, but I mean, I'm not denying anything you said about folk song and repetition and choruses and all that lovely stuff. And sorry, what do you mean when you say my thinking is binary? I mean, what do you mean, Denise? I'm not quite sure.
When you talk about speech act theory or something and an on-off digital structure, it's as if you're interested in that itself, and where is the stimulus for the transformation within that makes us evolve towards?
No, Denise, that's a misunderstanding.
All right, I'm saying I'm lost in that, so could you just clarify?
Well, it just depends whether you're interested in phonology, that's all. If you're interested in phonology, it was all pretty much invented by Roman Jakobson just before World War II and just afterwards. And he discovered this extraordinary fact, which is that you can kind of reduce all the world's vowels and consonants to these distinctive features, which are switched off or on. So, you know, you can be saying b, 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 meaning bin, and then you just switch off the voicing and you've got pin. I mean, it's just that on that one level, the phonology of language is digital. It's interesting that it's digital, because that means that there's a reason why with modern technology, if you take a photocopy and then you take a photocopy of a photocopy and a photocopy of another photocopy, you've ended up you can't even read it. And it's the same with those old videos. When you used to make copies of videos, you can make a copy of a copy of a copy, it's gone. But if it's digital, every single copy is exactly as good as the first copy. And there's a reason why when the digital format of language makes it possible to learn, to replicate, to use the same sentence, you know, again and again and again, or for children to acquire. It doesn't mean that the whole thing's restricted to a digital format. It just means you have that aspect. And if people don't sort of get that this weird thing about the phonology of language, which is that it's digital, in a sense that animal, I mean, there's nothing digital about a chimpanzee pantu. There's all, when it's heard, the listener is interested in the precise grade of anger, emotion, arousal. It's all on an analog. There's an infinite number of gradations. Whereas the difference between pin and bin is one little thing. I mean, at one level, of course, you could have a female voice, a male voice, a big voice, a loud voice, all kinds of things which aren't digital. But it is fascinating to learn that linguists, not just Chomsky, but modern linguists in general, say that if you're interested in linguistics, formal linguistics, language is a digital system. I don't want to reduce it to the digital system, but that is a really intriguing aspect of it. It makes it possible to transmit language down the generations in a way which, if it was analog, you can't copy something accurately if it's analog. You can't. I remember I was at a conference, I forget who it was, Susan Blackmore, wasn't it? She said, "Oh, Chris, copy this," and she did a weird dance all over the place, all over the floor, and she said, "Right, copy this." I said, "Susan, I can't copy that." And she said, "Yeah, exactly. Now, if I just do a few digital moves, like this counts as up, this counts as down, I'm going to do 2 ups and a down, copy that. Oh, that's easy, I did 2 ups and a down." So when it's digital, you can copy it very accurately, but when it's not digital, you know where you are.
Yes, but it's digital, but there's the switching off. There's something else that has to trigger the change.
Well, I mean, if I change, I mean, there's different levels of change. Do you mean change from one moment to another in the group, or do you mean the change in the human evolution? No, well, okay. Another whole thing I didn't talk about today was what is the language instinct? And Jerome and I are completely clear about it. There is a sort of language instinct. It's called play. It's the instinct for play. All little animals, when they're young, they're incredibly playful. Monkeys, I mean, anyone going to the park under COVID, under lockdown, just go to the, well, I'm amazed at those dogs when they chase each other, the weird and wonderful somersaults and antics they get up to. Incredibly creative. No two chases are the same. The play instinct is what makes us able to be so creative in language. But the trouble is that non-human primates, they stop playing once the sex comes along. All their play fighting turns into real fighting. And as soon as it sort of matters in a competitive sense, the play instinct gets sort of suppressed. And the amazing thing about humans is that we still carry on playing when we grow up. And even sex, you know, it doesn't have to be a conflict. You can have things called kinship rules and regulations, which make that subject to the rules of a chessboard. You know, you mustn't insult your mother-in-law. You're allowed to insult your son-in-law. All these funny things which go on. So that even sexual relationships are subject to the rules of a game, and within those rules, you can be very playful.
Tam, I think you're next, and then Amy. Tam.
Thank you. Fascinating, Chris. Again, indeedy. Thrown up all sorts of stuff. Just on that last one, that if it's then on play, why would the first beginnings of language not come before sex then? If it gets cut off because of sex, well then that's a few years down the line, isn't it, in terms of any animals?
It just means you have to keep reinventing language every generation, starting reinventing the whole wheel without learning anything from your parents. See, that's a very interesting point, though, Tam, because you see, that actually is the nearest you get to language in, say, chimpanzees would be little things which go on between a mother and baby. So a mother and baby, the baby may want to get the breast, and it will poke the mother's breast, and it's called a nursing poke. But each individual has its own particular way of poking. Some tug the breast, some prod it, some push it to one side. And so, but the particular nursing poke doesn't have a future. As soon as that infant grows up and is weaned, that particular meme, if you like, the little pattern of poke just gets lost. And then the next generation, they learn another thing, and it's a new nursing poke. So what you don't get is intergenerational transmission. Unless the play, like the system of pokes and various other things, get into adulthood, they won't get passed to the next generation from the previous one. And the crucial thing about culture is this thing called the ratchet effect, which is this cumulative accumulation of tricks, grammatical tricks, word coinages. So, you know, languages evolve historically through, you know, the whole system getting passed from one generation to the next, which it wouldn't do if play was confined to childhood. And with non-human primates, sex gets in the way. And all I'm saying is that play is humans had to kind of take on sex and sort of domesticate it. The play instinct, or the capacity of a social play, had to grab hold of its enemy, really, which is sex. Enemy is a source of huge amount of conflict. Get hold of it and make even that thing, even sex, subordinate to the rules of play. So that, of course, when you look at, say, I read Colin Turnbull's wonderful book, The Forest People, there's nothing more playful than sex. But for sex to be playful, the girls have to be really in charge of things. Otherwise, you know, things start getting pear-shaped if the boys think they can get away with harassment and, you know, all sorts of stuff. I mean, the girls have to be sort of in charge of sex for it to stay playful. And they do.
And that's why you say that the first word would be no.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, because I was thinking that, because it's absolutely fascinating, the idea of the revolution happened because of cooperation and not being forced, so that then I thought, well, would the first word not be yes? That allowed that to happen.
Every no is a yes, isn't it? I mean, the women's no is a yes to each other, to their kids, to their brothers, to their friends, and it's a no to somebody who might be a nuisance. I think it is rather like the picket line. You know, it's like no to the bosses, but you're definitely saying a bigger than ever yes to your mates as you discover more allies. You know, so every yes is a no, depending which way you're looking at it. It's definitely the great song, which was a no to male harassment or alpha male dominance was the biggest, most joyful yes in the history of our species. I mean, it absolutely was a yes, and no question about it. A welcome new world. Yeah.
Okay. Just one more then. I mean, there's loads I'd like to bring up, but just following on really from what Denise is saying, that this switching on and the digital, that all seems to sound like consonants. And it brings up what I brought up last week that Jill Purse said to me there about that human consonants are human and vowels are from the gods. Vowels don't seem to fit into this switching on and off and they're being completely whatever type of voice. Vowels can go on for a very long time. They're a completely different type of sound in that way.
I do agree with you. I very much agree. I'm not sure how it damages the theory about language emerging from music, because the polyphonic.
But that's about music. Because in terms of this, with what do you know the singing Neanderthals and that idea? Is that fitting into what you're saying? Or you?
Yes, sort of. Yes. Yeah. I mean, this is Steve Martin's theory, which is the first word was lots and lots of and maybe you can change your note while you're doing it all. I don't know. I think our understanding of the Neanderthals has moved on a bit, and I'm not really sure how explanatory that singing Neanderthals thing was. I don't see why the Neanderthals were more full of song than anatomically modern Homo sapiens. I think we were all singing from way back, by the way, right back to early Homo erectus.
But Chris, could I chip in a little?
Thank you, Melanie. He knows more about this than I do. Yeah.
Well, because the polyphony really the polyphony that's sung by Bayaka, it really consists of vowels, doesn't it? It's fundamentally not meanings. It's vowels, and surely part of the point of your model is that you can model a period when people are playing with noise, they're playing with sounds, but there isn't actually meaning attached to those sounds in any specific sense. And that's how the polyphony, the sung polyphony, gives you the sort of launch pad. And then within that framework, people can start doing the pums with bits of consonants, again, without yet any specific meaning, until specific meanings come out through some sort of avenue, like the Bruce Richmond, this is the song we have for hunting, this is the song we have for mourning, this is so the Neanderthals maybe have in the Mython model could sort of remain in that arena of singing without any specified and particular meaning, but it's a chorusing that would generate an enormous amount of emotional bonding, even though the meaning is not necessarily specified.
One of the things to stress.
Is that helpful?
Yes, one of the things to stress is that if you're involved in ritual, if you're currently in the middle of a choral singing ritual performance, you're all going to be of one mind anyway. I mean, you're all going to be having this, you're going to be sharing your moods, your feelings, your experiences. You're going to be in this other world of singing. There's absolutely no need to specify exactly what your thoughts to somebody who hasn't a clue until you're out of the ritual. You'll become an individual person in your own space, your own time. You're the person you're going to communicate with hasn't a clue what on earth you're thinking about, and you've now got to start specifying particular, particular position in space and time. Give the coordinates really of your imagination in some detail. And now you're going to need the digital stuff because you haven't a clue otherwise. So I'm just saying there's a really big difference between being in the communal singing and ritual when you're all of one mind anyway. And the last thing you need in polyphonic singing is words. I mean, you might have the odd word, but I mean, they're going to be assimilated to, the general sort of lovely chorus and sound. That, as with all music, I mean, the words are kind of not very relevant to most music, really. I mean, and if you do have a few words, they're going to be repeated again and again and again. It's nothing like language. You only need language between isolated individuals who having no longer who are now no longer in touch and need to get in touch outside ritual. And now you're going to need to specify what's in your mind using this strange digital apparatus which we have.
Amy, were you next?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm curious, as we're getting into talking a little more about no and sex strike, what relationship you see between the theories in Eve, when Eve laughed, of laughter being the original birth of language, in relationship with the first word as no in the female coalitions, especially in thinking about the Wawalak sisters and looking at that as a language origin story that also includes song.
Well, a wonderful question. Camilla just shut me up. I could go on forever with this, but okay. One of the loveliest things is that in world mythology, the first word is spoken in blood again and again and again. In the beginning was the word, and the word is like flesh and blood. And you know, the Wawalak sisters is one where these sisters conjoin their menstrual periods, and so they bleed together, and then they stop bleeding, and then they bleed together and stop somewhere, but then they stop bleeding and move. And each time they stop because they're bleeding, that the very flow of blood acts as a boundary and names the new countryside. Sometimes in the versions of the Wawalak sisters, they invent a whole new language every time they menstruate. So, and then there's, I don't know, there's the Dogon who say the first word came out of into somebody's ear from a woman's vagina with her blood. And it just again and again and again, you'll find the idea that the first word was spoken in blood. And I think that's a very interesting idea, because of course what language does is it separates this from that. And the very first separation was women making sure we are, for the moment, separate from you. We women are all together. We're going to bleed. We're going to, you know, draw a line, if you like. No, no means no. You men keep away. You're not having any sex. Don't think, you know. So, if language is fundamentally the act of naming, which means demarcating, separating sky from earth, land from sea, you know, animal from human, then you can see why it makes logical sense to say that was first spoken in blood.
Any more questions? How are we doing?
By the way, these have been really lovely and amazing and wonderful questions. Really, and the only way to do this is to get us all going at each other and sort of sort it all out, because there's no way Jerome and I can do this on our own. We're having a good old go, but.
I very much love the very last sentence, that it's a common myth that language made us human, but did you say it was not language, it was the prerequisite of language?
There's so many ridiculous things have been written about it all. There's Derek Bickerton, he's very intelligent, he wrote a wonderful book called Language and Species, but he actually argued that once you have, he had actually wrote a whole book called, I don't know, The Origin of Language and Social Cooperation, I think it was something like that. He actually argued that the explanation for the extraordinary degree to which humans cooperate, and we do, it's so amazing. I mean, you know, we have this weird thing called cooperation with strangers. So you don't have to be relatives, you don't have to know the person, we have whole communities based on cooperation. And Bickerton said it's because of language. And I'm just scratching my head. I mean, what on earth? How can words make you cooperate? I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, all this, think of all the civil wars, think of all the arguments between people of the same country speaking the same language. Think of the American Civil Wars, think of the American Revolution against the British, think of Northern Ireland, Protestants and Catholics. I mean, you know, it's the idea that language makes people, it doesn't, it's absolutely, and then of course you got these particularly ridiculous ideas about, oh, what we need is a world language. If only we had Esperanto, we all spoke Esperanto, there'd be world peace. I mean, really, pull the other one. I mean, what nonsense. This is all head stuff, the idea that cooperation comes from inside the head somewhere. And if only we had a sort of shared language. No, the shared language is the language of the picket line. You have to take action in solidarity. And then you might, with any luck, get you know, a shared language. And at the moment, we do sort of have elements of shared language. Music, as we've all been saying, is pretty much a shared language. I mean, it's very hard not to dance and you know, move to any culture's wonderful, you know, indigenous language, indigenous music. But also science is a world language in many ways. I'm very keen on that idea. You know, there is, you know, especially in the age of Boris Johnson and Donald Trump and various bloody idiots, you know, who don't, you know, science is very horribly restricted to certain specialist sort of fields and is useless when it starts getting into areas of life which are really interesting and significant. And that's we're trying to correct that as anthropologists, of course. But you know, there is. The idea that somehow language can make you cooperate is the worst nonsense. It really is shocking, idiocy. Sorry to be so rude. Perhaps I'm being too rude.
No, not rude.
Ian, is Ian going to say something?
Jenny, Ian, whoever's got a question.
Okay.
Jenny, Ian, go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
It's just picking up on Tam's point, really. I think that, I mean, I've never thought about it, but that sounds really worth pursuing. That okay, the digital is with the consonants, implying that the vowels are coming from an earlier stratum of the collective ritual.
Yeah.
And just encouraging you and Jerome to sort of think how you might play with that a bit.
Yeah, I think we should. I think what Tam said is really important, and I've got to think much more about vowels coming from the gods. That's a really lovely idea. Yeah. Of course, vowels are not. I agree they're not digital. You know, but I mean, you know, in any language you have what, 4 vowel sounds. I mean, in any particular language, I know obviously you have dialects and so on, but in any particular language you have a limited range of vowels. I mean, E, I, A, U, whatever. I mean, they are categorically distinct. So perhaps digital isn't quite the right word, but there's something categorical about the set of vowels permissible within a particular, you know, language or dialect.
Yes, but they're also more continuous.
Yeah.
They you know, they just fit in an idea of musicality.
They do, yes, absolutely right.
Would they have an aspect of authenticity? You wouldn't easily be able, they're associated more to specific emotion.
The other thing that Jill Peirce taught me was that these vowel sounds all have a location in the body, which I can't remember now, but there is one of the vowels that's located more down in the guts, and one in the chest, and particularly I think it was the ah sound in the throat. And this comes from Egyptian mythology, I think. But I think what could be interesting, if you are interested in this, is what I can't remember right now is the name of her husband, and he is a really interesting guy who, one thing he came up with is that dogs know when you're coming home. That it's beyond just instinct. They can tell when you're leaving your work, and he did all sorts of experiments on that. And he's a sort of radical, I don't think an anthropologist, but something along those lines. And I'll hopefully get his name back again before the end of this. But Rupert Sheldrake, indeedy. Thank you, Jacob. Yeah. But that's Jill Peirce's husband. Yeah.
There's a wonderful thing. I'm holding up this book called Sound Symbolism. It's been around for a long time, and I can't remember what his name was. Camilla, we had a lecturer at RAG, didn't we, who was telling us about sound symbolism, and a lot of.
Isn't it Gary Lupian?
Gary Lupian, well done, thank you. That's him, yes. And it is true that across the world, E, the vowel E, means little, and U means big. I mean, it's not absolutely consistent. There's one or two exceptions, but there's certainly a universal significance of the different vowels up to a point. So large things tend to have, like, you need a large opening of the mouth, and that's going to be like large. And E sounds, you contracted the space in your mouth, and they can tend to be tiny, weeny, little things. And there's a whole range of vowels across the world, which, there's a certain what's called sound symbolism. It's not quite the right term, I don't think, because then there's a certain intrinsic match between the way the mouth is shaped to make the vowel, and as Tam says, which part of the body the sound's coming from. Is it coming from the gut? Is it coming from high up in the throat? There's a kind of intrinsic connection between that and the meaning you're intending.
And wind instruments are particularly seductive, like flutes and saxophones and trumpets, and because they're like the human voice, I think.
That's right. Yes, I'm a percussionist, and at least I'm getting too old now. But I mean, my favourite is the surudu, the big number 2 big drum, and it just keeps the sort of beat going, and it's it feels like from deep in your gut somewhere. Yeah.
That's my baritone horn.
Okay, can you repeat the outer, Chris?
Can I read?
Author of sound symbolism.
David Reed.
Okay, thank you.
It's a lovely book.
Yeah.
And of course, all poets rely almost entirely on sound symbolism. A poet that doesn't get the intrinsic meaning of the sounds, I mean, they're not a poet, really. They don't know what they're doing.
Jenny, did you want to go? Can't hear. Mute. Can't hear you.
Thinking about that program on telly, Only Connect, where they have a quiz with the vowels left out. I don't know if you've seen that. You can very easily get the meanings of words when you take the vowels out. The consonants give you the meaning.
Yeah.
But I mean, Tam has demonstrated the vowels are where your local accent is carried, I think, isn't it? That's where your something, it tells you something different. I had a question which was about something else, which was about autism spectrum condition.
Yeah.
And where that fits, because we know that classically there's an understanding that people on the autistic spectrum have language difficulties, particularly with social communication, but also language itself. They're not good with symbolic language. They have difficulty with deceit or understanding deceit. There's a lot of crossovers with what you're talking about that turn up as deficits in the deficit model of autism. And I'm just throwing that out as an idea of, I don't really know what question I'm asking. I'm just sort of trying to make a link there somewhere.
Well, there is a link because language is hugely, in real life, it's hugely metaphorical, huge amounts of irony, humor, joking. I mean, one of my grandkids is absolutely fine. He's not on the spectrum at all, actually, it turns out. But when he was about 3 or 4, he just got so angry when Granddad Chris, that's me, whenever I cracked some kind of joke, he just got furious with me. Everything had to be literal, and I thought he looked like he was going to be on the spectrum because of that. Turns out he was just a little bit slow at developing and getting a joke. But my reading is I kind of started many years ago with Simon Baron Cohen, the brother of the comedian, and mind blindness. And yes, I mean, one of the factors one of the things which Sarah Hurdy talks about in Mothers and Others, one of the emergent properties of Mothers and Others, collective childcare, is the increasing ability in our species to read minds, but also be willing to be read. And and of course, to the extent you're on the autistic spectrum, your problem is mind reading. You lack so when you use a metaphor, and of course every metaphor is like a full statement. If you're fairly far along the spectrum, you just think, well, why are you what is it? Somebody said, pull the door behind you, and he pulls the door off its hinges and things. I mean, we don't mean what we say ever, literally. Whereas if you're far down the autistic spectrum, you take things literally, which isn't what language is all about. You're supposed to read the intention behind these kind of falsehoods.
Yes.
So it's very, very, very relevant issue. I don't, but of course, I know I've got all kinds of friends who are sort of high functioning autism, who are incredibly good with language, but maybe find joking and humor a little bit more difficult than some of us. But I suppose it depends where you are. But it is definitely relevant to the emergence of language. And non-human primates, chimpanzees are very good at reading others' minds. They're not too keen on having their own minds read in return. And that's again for reasons of suspicion and conflict. You don't want everyone to know what you're thinking, but in a competitive world, you do want to know what they're thinking. And so the mind reading tends to work one way more than the other. And that's reflected in the eyes, of course, with non-human primates. They have eyes which are dark on dark. They're not giveaway eyes, they're not transparent eyes. And we have eyes which are designed to be transparent to others so that anyone looking at your eyes should be able to read your thoughts.
And one thing about kids, particularly on the spectrum, is that they don't like direct eye contact. They find that very uncomfortable.
I hadn't quite, yes, I hadn't quite registered that. I see, yes. Okay, well, I suppose that makes sense. Yes, it can be threatening, can't it, to be looking at? I mean, certainly with non-human primates, mostly direct eye contact is threatening, but bonobos, when they have sex, apparently they look into each other's eyes quite lovingly. I'm told.
Thank you.
Is Javier's hand up?
Javier was, yeah. Do you want to ask? Yeah?
I'm here. Just fascinating. Thank you. I'm really fascinated by the whole talk. And it's great to be able to hear this again and see how further the ideas have gone. I was remembering many years ago, the collective of you organized an event in London about the moon, and there were, I think, people from the Kalahari, some people that came over, and they brought this amazing song, which I learned and I still practice and use with community groups, because it's just one wonderful way of linking up and creating trust and creating a good atmosphere to talk and to engage on difficult issues, such as talking about racism and things like that. And one of the fascinating things about this song is that it's mostly vowel sounds. So, and all the song hasn't got any consonant sounds. It's basically mostly A's or and then there is other things that go on top as a cascade, obviously the and one of the things that this does, I mean, all the cascade of the polyphonic put together, is that it creates this amazing trance in which it really allows you to connect with others in a very interesting way. I wonder if that has to do anything with what you were talking about in terms of, you talk about the switching of consonants, but vowels and vowel sounds being very important within rituals and singing within rituals.
I suppose this may connect up with Denise's point. When I talk about this digital structure of phonology, I suppose all I'm trying to do is I'm trying to be inclusive. I mean, as anthropologists, I just feel we should try to embrace all these different sort of perspectives on this most important thing, which is language. And so it's I mean, yes, strictly speaking, what linguists call language doesn't have any emotional impact. It doesn't bond you, it doesn't move you, it doesn't touch you. And unless you start moving into something like poetry and song and all those things which have got nothing to do with a digital structure, but then on the other hand, wouldn't be of much interest to linguists, you're not going to be very powerfully moving people. So yes, I mean, to get into a shamanic trance, I don't think you need grammar one little bit. I remember when I was brought up a Roman Catholic, and I remember absolutely loving going to the cathedral. And I sang in treble in Wells Cathedral. And I just remember the wonderful feeling of the singing, provided I didn't know anything about what they were singing about. As long as it was in Latin, it was completely magical. But when I realized what the words were, when it was translated into English, which happened because the Catholics made a ridiculous decision to start translating all this mystical stuff into the local language, it just lost all its magic. So my view is that words have magic when they're not very comprehensible. Right. When you can understand them, all the magic goes. But language isn't language as such. The kind of thing that Noam Chomsky calls language, and professional linguists call language, it just ain't magical at all. It's just specifying some concept or string of concepts, and you lose the magic unless you keep all the non-linguistic stuff. And that, of course, you nothing to stop you saying that non-linguistic stuff is itself linguistic. I suppose it depends how you define language. But poets, sure, it's language, but I mean, a poet doesn't have to worry at all about grammar, I don't think. Well, I suppose you do a little bit, but somehow the things that linguists are interested in, and by the way, linguists are extremely boring people. I mean, they really are. I've had to live with them for 20 years. I'm astonished at how finicky and formal and uninteresting their topics are. These weird sort of sample sentences. John is easy to please, John is eager to please, I don't know, all these things. I mean, they are fascinating to linguists, but for most people in this group, you just, I don't know, you lose the will to live when you start getting into formal linguistics. But all I'm saying is, I just feel that a theory of the origin of language should cover even those aspects, which I'm not all that interested in intrinsically, but I feel an adequate theory has to have a broad sweep and shouldn't leave problems which remain unsolved, which the formal linguist can say, you haven't explained this. I'd rather say, well, no, we can explain that as well as all the magical stuff.
Right, thank you.
I can't quite remember, Javier, when we've had several moon rooms. Can't quite remember Kalahari singing any of those. We had the Hadza, we had others, but
maybe maybe you were in Kalahari, were Hadza. I think 2006.
2006. Okay. Okay, thank you, Kavi. Yes. Okay. Yeah. But perhaps just say to everybody, next Tuesday we haven't got the speaker that's advertised because he's not well, so we haven't got the Hadza discussion on whether easy access to weapons sponsors or fosters egalitarianism. We've got Ian speaking about the moon, so he's speaking about the Hadza and other Africans going back into the past using archaeological evidence. How central the moon was to effective hunting, and knowing what, timing your hunts according to lunar phase was absolutely crucial, and that's going to be next week. I only mentioned that because you mentioned the moon rule. We've always had some people think we're crazy about the moon. I don't think that at all. I think we're crazy about the sun, about all these things, the earth, sea, land. It's just that there's a particular taboo around the moon in this part of the world, which is just ludicrous. It's just a religious taboo that Christians seem to have about. They get very worried about two things: one's women, and the other's the moon. And we just think that that's just absurd. We're an Earth, Sun, Moon system. That's why we got life on this amazing planet, and we should be completely open to the moon's huge influence on the history of life on Earth, and not be shy of it, especially not for stupid patriarchal religious reasons. And Rosalie's reminding us that other people still use lunar calendars, and in fact, as Camilla will confirm, there's not a religion, there's not a traditional religion in the world whose calendar is not, even to this day, lunar.
So, are we going to break up? Oh, we've still got some people. Are there any more questions? We do some more. Jacob hasn't asked.
Jacob, I want Jacob to speak.
Jacob's question.
Yeah. I just wanted to throw into the vowel conversation the vagus nerve.
All right.
And that if you might want to take a look at the science that's coming out around that, and that by singing, we're regulating our nervous system. So to create trance, you can't do it with consonants, you need to do it with humming or singing, with the vowels. And then in the theater, which I think is true just in life, when we get emotional, we lose consonants. And so the more out of control that we get, it becomes all vowels. And so that might go into the primordial. So we're often told in the theater to like bring the consonants in when we start to lose, when the emotions start going, but we still have text to say is focus on the consonants, and then vice versa. If there's not enough heart coming.
All those primate vocalizations, the panting, the barbark, they're entirely vowels. There's no consonants in them. They don't, as I say, they don't eat while they're phonating. They just, because they've got no meaning for primates. They need to hear the body, the motion, the bodily state. The consonants are just, rubbish.
Yeah. And it also goes to the violence of silence. If people are not allowed to make sound with other people, if there are voices that are not allowed in public spaces, it destroys the body, the vagus nerve, and all of that system. So
just briefly, what's this about the vagus nerve? Because I'm really ignorant. I haven't even heard of it. That's terrible.
Oh.
Well, I certainly, I'm not qualified to speak at length about it, but it's that sense of trance that comes from singing, the sense of well-being, the sense of oneness, is directly related to the vagus nerves being vibrated, and then it releasing chemicals into the body that allow those things to happen.
And there's a really important link between the vagus nerve, between the brain and the gut. There's a direct link there. Which may explain all sorts of things, like why, when you get nervous, you feel sick, for example.
All right.
This is Darsha. The vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve, and it innervates all the major systems of the body. So it does go to the gut, but also the heart, the lungs. And so in your early life, you need to be well cared for, which is what I study. And it sets up the vagus nerve to work properly. Otherwise, if it doesn't work properly, you can have problems with respiration, asthma, irritable bowel, all sorts of different organs cannot work properly depending on when you were stressed out. So it's really important now. It's being used to, it's getting easier to study in the lab, and is linked to cooperative behavior, compassionate behavior, self-regulation, that kind of thing.
Well, that's wonderful. I've learned a lot this evening. Thank you. You've been teaching me. It's great.
Yes. Have we still got some questions? Hugh and Tam, are you more questions or not? Yeah. Who wants to go? No.
I need to do some more thinking, so maybe by next week.
Yeah.
So maybe it's.
I think you had a wonderful go. So
yeah. Well, it's a good note to end on with Dasha's contribution there. Thank you. And we'll see everyone next week then with Ian's talk rather than Douglas.
Yep. Thank you so much, all of you. It's been great.
Thank you very much for great questions.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.